Well, hello everybody and welcome along to a brand new video today where I'm continuing once again my classic Doctor reviews. I'm really just trying to keep these pumping out for you guys at the moment as I get really into and really enjoying classic Doctor Who as something to fill the year with. But today we've come to The Wheel in Space, which wasn't really my favourite of the classic Doctor Who stories. So yes, this is the final story of season 5 of Doctor Who from way back in 1968. This episode aired for the first time. The Cybermen return once again in the Patrick Troughton era, the third story out of 4. After Tomb of the Cybermen opened season 5, it's Wheel in Space that closes season 5 with the Cybermen bookending the whole season. And this is definitely the weakest Cybermen story we've seen so far. It's comfortably not that good. I have to say it feels overly long, it's not very exciting, there's not that much action going on, it's all a little bit, you're not quite sure why this is happening. So yeah, it's not the greatest story I've ever watched. I think to a degree it's not being helped by the fact there's only missing episodes from this story. Of course, only episodes 3 and 6 exist of the 6-episode story at the moment, so we're missing 4 out of 6 episodes, which does make it quite difficult, and particularly in episode 1, where there's very little dialogue. For a large part of that episode, it's all kind of Jamie and the Doctor exploring this missile rocket thing, whatever you want to call it. And there's not a lot of talking going on as they're wandering around it, and this weird kind of robot creatures there as well. The loose kind of reconstruction, which I watched, attempts a little bit of basic animation for the scenes, which does look pretty good, but it's still obviously not the same as having to be able to see the actual episode. And with such a lack of dialogue, it just makes it kind of hard to engage, I found, in that opening episode. I think that's sort of the episode that could be fantastic if it existed, but with it just being basically a soundtrack, it's quite difficult to engage with. So I think straight off the bat, that kind of made it harder to get into straight away, because it's quite nice to occasionally have that sort of just a couple of characters, a bit of a two-hander almost, that episode, with pretty much only the Doctor and Jamie that we see throughout the whole of episode 1. And so yeah, as I say, I think if it existed, it would be a lot better, but it just made it hard for me to immediately get involved in the story. And from there, we obviously get onto the wheel, and this wheel that's floating around in space, and we're trying to understand exactly what's going on. And one of the best things about this story was the end of episode 2, where the Cybermen appear in these glass sort of, all these weird domes, sphere things, whatever you want to call them, I don't really know, that were floating around for the first couple of episodes. Suddenly the cliffhanger in episode 2, you kind of see inside it and there's a Cyberman appearing. And that was a really, really good reveal. I was actually really impressed with that, because sort of, usually the Cybermen get spoiled very early on, or it's in the title or something like that, but in this it's called The Wheel in Space, there's no indication really, and there's suddenly the end of episode 2, that cliffhanger of wow, it's the Cybermen, they're back once again. So I thought that was definitely one of the strongest points of this story, was that, not because I obviously knew it was the Cybermen, but somebody who didn't, that would be a really, I think, quite surprising and exciting moment to see it's the Cybermen. Unfortunately, overall in this story, the Cybermen were one of the disappointments because, well, there's only 2 of them. I'm pretty sure we didn't, maybe in the very last few minutes, in that last scene with the Cybermen trying to break into the new Cybermen trying to break into the wheel. Other than that, we only saw 2 Cybermen on screen throughout the whole story, I think it was. And it just kind of made it feel like the Cybermen weren't really that much of a threat, because they didn't really do that much. They turned up on the wheel by about episode 4 or 5, killed a few people, yes, quite brutally. They killed the sort of captain, commander of the ship in episode 6, and just picked him up, threw him across the room, and then shot him. It was like, that's quite brutal. So that was one of the better moments for the Cybermen, but generally they were just a bit kind of lumbering around, don't really know quite what they're doing. We don't really know why they're here, what their point is, what their plan is. Don't really seem to find that out very much. And there's only 2 of them, so there's not really that threat. The voices are awful. They're really not, after such a great voice in Tomb of the Cybermen, which is basically what the Cyber Planner in this story uses as a voice. They're just a kind of very dull, I mean, it's monotonous, the Cybermen are monotonous, but it's not an interesting monotonous voice, if that's not a bit of a contradiction. It just feels dull and boring and basic, and like they didn't really put much effort into the voices. So that was a little bit of a disappointment as well. I think the Cybermen just weren't really the threat I was hoping they would be. And the other problem was, as I say, I just didn't really know what they were doing until the end of episode 6, where I think they were trying to take over the wheel so that they could infiltrate Earth and then bring their whole invasion fleet in and invade Earth for some reason. Tell me if I'm completely wrong in the reading of this story, because I did watch it in 2 separate chunks, 3 days apart, and was struggling to engage in some of the recons, but I'm pretty sure that's what their ultimate plan was, which is pretty... Yes, it's kind of bog standard Doctor Who from the time to a degree, but it did just sort of seem a little bit underwhelming after all these 6 episodes of intrigue and mystery and them trying to infiltrate the wheel. It was just so they could nab it and invade Earth. Fair enough, guys, but it wasn't really very successful. The Doctor just blew up their blooming spaceship, and, well, he killed one of the Cybermen, and then the other Cyberman got killed as well, and that was it. It was kind of all over in a flash, which was a little bit of a shame. This story obviously introduces Zoe as the new, or ultimately the new companion for for season 6 of Doctor Who, and she's clearly presented as a very smart person, one maybe lacking in emotions and feelings a bit, so it's quite nice. Obviously I've seen some of the later ones with her in, and it's quite nice to finally kind of see the setup of her character for the first time, where she's very, very intelligent. She's the most intelligent Doctor Who companion we've had, I think, so far. But she doesn't really have any emotion at all. And she wants emotions, she wants to feel things, but she's kind of struggling to. So I'm looking forward to kind of properly seeing that journey to her starting to kind of feel things and feel emotion a bit more, I think. So that's quite a nice, and a very nice kind of thing to play off with Jamie as well. When you've got Jamie who's kind of, well, he's from the 1700s, so he's kind of not very smart, but he's quite sort of an emotive character. And so that the sort of dynamic of those two playing off each other, I think, is going to be really, really good to watch through the next season. So I'm really kind of looking forward to properly seeing that for the first time. Ultimately, this does kind of feel like the epitome of a bog standard second Doctor story, because it is a base under siege story once again. It's with the Cybermen once again, on a spaceship once again, and it just... It didn't really do it for me. It felt overly long. I think the reconstructions definitely didn't help me. I think this was one of those stories where if it existed, I might have enjoyed it more, but it just wasn't that action-packed, so it wasn't very easy to engage with. It just felt like it was slow and dragging along quite a lot, unfortunately, and didn't really have a big, exciting conclusion. The Cybermen didn't feel that much of a threat. They were defeated very, very easily as well, and their plan was a bit rubbish. It just didn't really give me a lot to get excited about in this story, which is a shame, because I'd always heard about The Wheel in Space, another Cyberman story, one of the few Cybermen stories I hadn't seen before. I think I have now seen every single Cyberman story in Classic Who, because I've seen The Invasion, Revenge, Earthshock, Silver Nemesis, and Attack of the Cybermen, obviously all the new stuff. So I have actually seen, this was the last Cyberman story that I hadn't seen before. And it's a bit of a shame that it wasn't really a good one to end on. It was a little bit just underwhelming, I think, is probably the way to describe it. And particularly, I guess at the time it would have been the season finale as well, which of course is the Cybermen, so the younger kids would probably still get excited about that. But anybody a bit older and looking at this as a story will have kind of seen it's fairly bog standard and basic Doctor Who, with good monsters in. I mean, their costumes I don't think were quite as good. They're kind of quite slicker. They almost, in a way, they almost look naked. Without anything kind of on the legs or anything like that. It was all very tight. It sort of reminded me of the Revenge of the Cybermen costumes to a degree, obviously with a different headgear. But it kind of reminded me of that style of Cyberman a little bit more. So I thought that was a little bit odd, a little bit different as well. But then these Cybermen did feel just a little bit different from most of the other stories. One thing I did like about this was the use of, the Cybermen got a lot more kind of involved with hypnosis in this story. We've seen a little bit of it in Tomb of the Cybermen with Toberman and things like that, and them taking control of people's minds. But it was quite nice to see how big of a thing it was in this story. The Cybermen were trying kind of, one of the good aspects of it, although their plan wasn't great, was they were kind of being quite scheming and had quite a kind of cunning way of trying to infiltrate the base by capturing the astronauts or the people from the spaceship who'd come over to their sort of missile rocket thing, and then hypnotising them, sending them back to be able to do their dirty work and bring them back in that little crate thing. That was quite a funny moment, really, where they just sort of crawl up into a little crate and then gets wheeled back across through space into the wheel, and then it all goes wrong from there, really. So I thought that was yeah, one of the more effective parts of this story was that kind of use of hypnosis, even if it was kind of like you're looking at these guys who have been hypnotised talking in dead monotone. And it's how did everybody else not realise that he's been hypnotised when it's pretty blatantly obvious to everybody who's watching. So, I mean, to be fair, that's quite often a problem in classic Doctor Who, is any sort of hypnotism looks very obvious to the audience, but it's never realised by the characters, unless it's maybe the Doctor who notices because it's plot specific for it. So that was overall one of the better parts of this story, but obviously still not perfect. But yes, overall, unfortunately, this is a bit of a disappointing story. Probably my least favourite Cyberman story that I've seen so far. I wouldn't say it's the worst of the Patrick Troughton era, but it's definitely on the lower end, and I can understand now why people have often said it's not really that great. Is it really worth animating and all that kind of thing. I'd still like to see an animated one if we ever do get it, or obviously the recovered episodes, just to be able to see more visually what the story would kind of look like and do, and maybe it would engage me a little bit more and enhance it as a story. I don't know. That would be really interesting to see if that did ever happen. I think it's definitely a candidate for an animation because it's a Cyberman story. It's the only sort of Cyberman story that hasn't either existed or been animated as of yet, so it seems an obvious candidate along with Evil of the Daleks and maybe Dalek Master Plan as the sort of three, I guess, most obvious animations for the future, possibly. I'm sure we will get more. Of course, we had the Macra Terror, and I'm sure there'll be many more to come in the future. It might just take quite a long time. And yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing an animated, but it's probably not top of my list given that it's not a great story overall. But if you guys do think otherwise, let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you've got a bit more of a defense of With the Wheel in Space and I've missed the whole point of the story or something. Do let me know. I'd love to hear why you think it's a much better story, or if you do agree with me as well, I'd love to hear why you feel that way as well. But that's it from this video. I'll be back again with another Classic Doctor review very soon. I think I'm going to be reviewing the Dominators next, another story I've never seen before, other than knowing that it's not very highly rated, but is fully existing, so I'm looking forward to being able to watch a full story that's not any recons, as I've finally reached the point where we've only got one more story of recons to go with the Space Pirates, which is apparently awful and only has one existing episode out of 6, so it's going to be a painful one, but knowing I've only got one more story of recons to go is quite nice, because as much as the recons are a good way of watching the missing episodes, they are still not good in comparison to watching the actual thing. So knowing once I get past that there'll be no more reconstruction to have to watch is going to be so nice, and knowing that from here on out for the rest of the Classic Who marathon I get to see every single episode I watch will be existing and there'll be moving pictures and it'll all just actually look nice. That's something really to look forward to, so I'm very pleased there's only one of those in season 6. Everything else is either existing or the invasion is animated, and so lots to enjoy, lots of reviews to come, and I hope you guys are looking forward to all that. But if you've enjoyed this video, do remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again for that review very, very soon. Goodbye!